Anytime where I take listening to Nigerian news, I dey always ask myself, say the debts wey dem dey hold, so who wan pay am? Una fit not understand why I dey talk like this, because the debts wey be say Nigeria dey owe no be small pikin matter. And now they talk about how they want to give Nigerians light, okay? And the truth is, they don't even get the right equipment. Like, what is the giant of Africa inside? Abeg, Mona look this video, Mona tell me, because like I me no they understand. Because the thing is just beyond me, It's too much.
Electricity access continues to be a hurdle for millions across the sub-Saharan Africa region, according to a recent report compiled by the International Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy Agency, the United Nations, and the World Health Organization. As of 2021, the countries with the largest number of people without electricity access were Nigeria, 86 million people, the DR Congo with 76 million, and Ethiopia, 55 million people. And still on electricity, Nigeria's Business Day newspaper is reporting that sources say President Tinubu has assented to the electricity bill, which was passed in July of 2022. The bill is seeking to repeal the Electricity and Power Sector Reform Act of 2005, thus becoming the Electricity Act, and consolidate all legislations dealing with the electricity supply industry to encourage private sector investments. From our Abuja studios, we're live to Kelvin Emmanuel, the CEO of Dairy Hills Limited, and we're lighting up this conversation. It's good to see you again, my friend. It's been quite some time. It's like good getting together again.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Let's light it up. It's a Friday. Great to see you again. Thank you so much. What do you make of this Business Day report, quoting sources within the new presidency that the new president has put his signature to a new electricity bill that consolidates all that we've got on paper into a new electricity document?
Well, I think it's a positive development, going forward from Bill number 33 in the fifth constitutional amendment, along with several other bills that has been assented to. It's a positive development because with these assent from the Electricity Sector Reforms Act of 2005, what the president has done basically is saying that the regulation for generation and transmission is now resting with National Electricity Regulatory Commission, NEC, while the regulation for distribution now rests with state electricity boards. And so far, only Edo State, Lagos State, and Kaduna State has actually passed laws that will govern the setup and establishment and administration of electricity markets in their respective states. And this Electricity Act 2023 says that pending when the other 33 states actually develops state framework, legal framework at their state house of assembly, the regulation for distribution is going to rest with NEC, pending when they do that. But the reality of on the ground is, as you begin to unbundle transmission capacity that actually impacts the ability of the discos to get sufficient load from the generating companies. Because if you look at the electricity power sector, you see that not all the load given to TCN is actually transmitted to the discos. TCN is a market operator. Now, there are issues with, of course, Nigeria has a 38% prepaid penetration rate that leads to a lot of impairment. And there's a historical about 31% impairment in collections, And you have several discos that are owing money that has led to them going into administration. And you have Ibadan Electricity Distribution Company, AEDC, was recently transferred from UBA because I think the previous owners of AEDC were owing UBA, and it was recently transferred to Transcorp Power. Kaduna Electric is owing the market operator 51 billion and is going into administration. So when you consider the fact that in the final settlement statements or invoices that are sent from the generating companies to the market operator for the discos to pay, and you have embed there covering the shortfall, and you consider that there's a 1.3 million naira outstanding debt, the question I have, is how does the federal government, try to unbundle these debts and incentivize the generating companies to raise generating capacity? And this is because In Ghana, for example, Ghana has a population of 32.6 million people. Ghana generates about 3,300 megawatts. Nigeria has a population of 209 million people. So Ghana's population is basically 15.6% of Nigeria's population, but it generates 68% of the load that Nigeria generates. So how do you incentivize the generating companies to raise their output when you have so much debt, right? Inefficient transmission capacity. You have an issue of distribution of gas around Nigeria, which is one of the major sources of powering thermal plants for generating companies. AKK, for example, that was meant to supply gas across the northwest and north central region is stampeded by the fact that the pipe is currently in Abuja and it's not even gone to Kaduna and then the last leg of Kano yet, because it has issues with funding. How do you also ensure that LPF or low poor fuel oil is coming at a reasonable price for the generating companies to be able to generate electricity? How do you ensure that the GenCos are able to backwardly integrate the maintenance and spare facilities in Nigeria so that they are not exposed to FS risk in order to be able to service their equipment, and they don't have downtimes that affect the generating capacity? How do you ensure that prepaid meters are produced at a reasonable rate in Nigeria and they are distributed? Because the issue has always been, people say, we request for prepaid meters, we don't get it. Or there's not a lot of adoption of prepaid meters in Nigeria. So these are the issues that the federal government, NEC, MBET is going out. The DISCOs have to sit down together, and the state governors, Nigeria Governors Forum, they have to sit down together to answer and to address going forward.
Why do you think this wasn't signed by former President Muhammadu Buhari? The bill was passed 11 months ago in July of last year. So what has changed? What's the difference over the last year or so? And why do you think the current president is putting the signatures to it as quickly as possible, even within the first 100 days in office?
The current president realizes that, for example, Lagos, that has a population of 20 million people and generates less than 1,000 megawatts, is suffering, and that Lagos actually needs a state electricity board, and they need to be able to come up with mini grids and IPPs to generate as much power as they can and set up state electricity boards. Look, former President Buhari realizes that I'm not holding brief for him. He should have signed it earlier. There are also other parts of the bills that were sent to him, that were passed, sent to him for accent, that I expected him to sign, that he didn't sign. But he realized that, look, if he has signed it, the unbundling of the system or the structure will start immediately. Maybe he didn't want to see that fallout and that unbundling process, just like he didn't want to see through the removal of petrol subsidy, even if, according to the PIA, the subsidy was only provisioned for 6 months in 2023 Appropriation Act. So maybe that's the reason why he didn't sign it, and this president has signed. This president realizes that without electricity, it's difficult for you to produce. And if you don't raise your production capacity, you can't begin to align all the other macroeconomic indicators to get the economy back on track.
Well, there's a report from a number of institutions which says 86 million people in Nigeria reside without electricity as at 2021. Is this a fair assessment? And do you think this bill will can go a long way in reducing that figure?
Look, I think this bill is a step in the right direction. And like I said, this president has what they call the gas first policy. The president needs to start to build high transmission pipes to distribute gas around Nigeria for generating companies. In this Nigerian Electricity Act of 2023, there's an interesting caveat that I think is very good. And the caveat is generating companies actually have renewable energy targets to either get power purchasing agreement from third-party companies who build industrial solar farms and wind turbine farms to be able to add load and sell load to the generating companies. My disappointment, though, is the fact that the government did not see a need to actually raise the captive energy framework from 1 megawatt to 5 to 10 megawatts for companies, independent companies that don't have the big generating company license to be able to generate independent capacity, mostly through IPPs, or even if they want to set up solar farms or wind turbines for areas that have strong winds in Nigeria. I think this bill is a step in the right direction, because what you're going to see is, if this government proceeds with its plan to actually deregulate the price of gas, and build pipeline, high transmission pipe infrastructure around Nigeria, what you're going to see is you're going to see more investments coming. You're going to see companies increase their generating capacity, existing gencos. You're going to see the national grid decentralized. That is absolutely critical for investments to come into building transmission infrastructure. So when you generate load, the load can be passed on from generating companies to the distribution companies. I also think that this bill is going to spell the end for Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, and it's also going to lead to gradually cost-reflective tariffs. So the question I have is, how are state governments, through their state electricity board, since they actually are going to manage regulation of distribution, going to cope with impairment losses that will come from a distribution company? Maybe let's pick IKEDC or EKEDC, for example, or Benin Electricity Distribution Company. Maybe they have an impairment loss of 30 or 40%. How will the state cover the impairment loss, considering the fiscal position of a lot of states in Nigeria? So these are the questions that I think the Nigerian Governors Forum, they need to address. This needs to form a focal point and a center of the agenda. The current chairman of Nigerian Governors Forum is Kwara State. It needs to form the focal point of the agenda, because electricity is absolutely crucial and critical for industrialization of the Nigerian economy.
Is that across sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at 80% of the world population lack electricity residing in sub-Saharan Africa, where Nigeria is included. So, do you think lack of power is the single largest hurdle to development? And do you think renewables, such as what Egypt is working on, $10 billion wind farm, will be a curtain raiser or be a game changer?
Well, I think renewables has a part to play, and that's because if you consider the geography of Nigeria, you see that the northern part of Nigeria, for example, has a deficit of gas supply. If you look at the West African Gas Pipeline Company, and you see the shareholders, Chevron, Total, NNPC has 27.9% of WACPICO, Togolese Bengas, you are Société Bengas, Benin Republic Gas Company. You have Volta Region Authority, VAR, and you consider the fact that Volta Regional Authority, for example, that has a stake in WACPICO, actually generates 2,600 of the 3,300 megawatts of electricity that Ghana generates, which is a major chunk. So when you consider the distribution of gas across West Africa, and you see that the export pipeline actually comes from Nigeria, you begin to understand the reason why there is deficit for electricity in these West African countries, and why the ability to be able to key into carbon control and setting up wind farms in places where they have strong wind, and setting up industrial solar farms in places where they have high solar energy is absolutely critical to begin to balance that mix of energy. And I'll tell you what, Ghana currently produces about 177,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Every barrel of crude oil gives you about 6,000 cubic feet of natural gas. That's about 1,062 cubic feet of natural gas, associated gas, that is generated in Ghana. If Ghana is able to harness the associated gas, purify it, and convert it into piped natural gas that Volta Regional Authority, for example, needs to generate electricity, what you're going to see is that cost-reflective tariff in Ghana begin to come down gradually, because it doesn't get gas from export pipeline that comes from Nigeria, which is actually more expensive than his ability to generate his own gas in Ghana.
Okay, Kelvin, I'm sure you're keeping one eye on who becomes Nigeria's next power or energy minister. I'm sure you're waiting to see who President Tinubu will name as the next power minister. And maybe he's just going, maybe he himself is just going to hold that. I'm sure maybe he's just going to hold that portfolio, by the way. So maybe we're just going to see a change in which you have a president who holds the office as the energy or the power minister, just to power things as we need it. Thank you. It's a very good Friday. Thank you very much for being part. Enjoy the rest of your